This is Bob Reed. It's Sunday, July 26, 1998 at 9:45 in the morning. I'm in the Diplomat Room at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in San Francisco. Across from me is Alan J. Bloom, whose residence address is 9901 Meriden Road, Potomac, Maryland, 20854. Telephone 301-983-8920. Alan and I are here on behalf of the Society for the Preservation of Professional Touring Entertainment History at the University of Texas in Austin. Alan, it's a pleasure to have you for this oral history, which I know will be a very important addition to the archives at the University of Texas. The first question, as it always is for an oral history, is where were you born and when?
I was born in Los Angeles, California on August 28, 1935.
And your parents' first names?
Harry and Pearl.
What did your father do for a living?
The time I was born, he was unemployed. It was during the Depression. And prior to that, he had worked for a newspaper in Paterson, New Jersey.
What was the name of the paper, do you recall?
The Morning Call.
Morning Call. And what type of work did he do there?
I don't really know. Labor, linotype, press work.
Okay. And was your mother employed outside the home?
Later on, she worked for a doll factory making Deity dolls.
Where was that?
That was in, I believe that was when we lived in the Bronx.
When did your folks move to the Bronx?
Well,
or did they live places in between?
My father was born in Paterson, New Jersey, and when my parents got married, they lived in and around New York and New Jersey. But the newspaper went on strike soon after the Depression started, and my father couldn't get a job, so they packed my sisters and brother into a car, and my mother was pregnant with me at the time, drove cross country to California, where my mother's brother lived, in hopes of getting work there. I was born, and 3 years later, my father still didn't have a job. Other than washing dishes, or he was a good humor man for a while.
Part-time type jobs.
Yeah.
So this trek across the country from New Jersey to California was about 1934?
1935.
1935, and you were born in
August
of 35. When then did they go back to the East Coast?
I was 3 at the time. We moved back to the Bronx. I'm sorry, to Brooklyn. Lived in Brooklyn for 2 years, and then moved to the Bronx for 2 years. Then moved to Newark, New Jersey for 2 years.
Did he gain employment within that stretch of 6 years?
Yeah, when we moved to Newark, got a job with the Worthington Pump Company.
That was a labor type job?
Yeah.
And by then your mother was also employed?
Yeah, but I don't know. But she was at the. I don't know what she did when we were in Newark. She was working, but I don't know what she was doing.
Okay. And your brothers and sisters' names and places now?
My oldest brother, Seymour, lives in Naperville, Illinois. He's retired.
What was his job?
He was a consulting engineer for Feld Telephone Laboratories.
Other siblings?
I have 2 sisters, Marilyn, who lives in Chevy Chase, Maryland, and my other sister, Arlene, who lives in Denver.
Are either of the sisters employed outside the home?
No.
Are all 3 of your siblings married?
Yes.
All of them have children?
Yeah, my brother has 2 children, a boy and a girl, and my older sister Marilyn has 5 daughters, and Arlene has 4 sons and a daughter.
So you have 11 nephews and nieces.
11 nephews and nieces.
When did you start school and where?
No, I have 12 nieces and nephews.
12 nieces and nephews.
Both sisters have 5 children each.
Okay, and Seymour has 2.
2, right.
Okay. Where and when did you start school?
Started school in the Bronx, kindergarten.
And did you continue then? Well, as your family moved, I assume you probably went to different elementary schools.
Yeah, and then I went to the first and second grade. No, I went to kindergarten and first grade in the Bronx. Went to second and third grade in Newark, and then when we moved to Washington, started in the third grade.
Right in Washington, D.C.?
Yes, southeast
inside
Washington.
the city limits, yeah.
Lived in my father got a temporary job with the government printing office in Washington in 1940. I think it was 1943.
So from the 5th grade on?
From the third grade on.
Third grade on, you were in Washington. And then how many years were you in how many years were you in school in Washington then?
Well, I went full-time to school from the 3rd grade to the 10th grade. And I went part-time.
In 11th?
10th, 11th, and 12th.
This was all in Washington, D.C.?
Mm-hmm.
What was the high school at that time?
Coolidge High School. Calvin Coolidge High School.
Right. Then at the end of the part-time year in the 12th grade, did that end the formal education?
Yes.
What was your first job after 12th grade?
No, I started working when I was 11.
And what did you do?
I worked in a warehouse, packaging records. The Feld brothers had sales every weekend. They would put 5 records in one package and put it on sale.
Are these 78
RPM records.
Yeah. So was this your first? You were 11, and that was your first experience with the Feld family?
Yes.
How did
Well, I'd met the Feld family when I was 9 years old.
How did you meet them?
When we first moved to Washington, my brother was 14, and went out looking for a job. And my mother found an ad in the newspaper advertising for part-time after-school work in a drugstore. My brother answered the ad. It was for Super Cut Rate Drugs, which was owned by the Feld brothers. And he started working there. And through that, we became friends with the Felds.
Did he bring you onto the job sometime? And
Well, what happened was he came home at night with comic books and candy bars. And I kept saying, "Where'd you get those?" He said, "Where I work." And so I said, "Well, I got to go find this place." So I used to go down there with him, and they would let me eat all the candy I wanted. They had a soda fountain. I'd go behind the soda fountain, make banana splits for myself and milkshakes and whatever. And by that time, the whole family had become friends with the Felds. My mother started working there, and it was one Saturday morning when I was 11, and I had a big fight with my mother in the store, and Irvin walked by at the time, and my mother said to Irvin, "Get him out of my hair, put him to work." That's how I started working.
So you were 11 at that time?
Correct.
When you got out of your mother's hair?
Correct.
When you say the Feld brothers, can you identify the Feld brothers?
Irvin Feld and his brother Israel.
Okay. Who was the older?
Israel.
How much older was he than Irvin?
I believe he was like 6 or 7 years older.
I know Irvin's passed on. Is Israel still alive?
No, Israel passed away in 1972, I believe.
And Irvin passed on when?
1984.
1984. Do you remember how old they were when they died?
Irvin was 66. I believe Izzy was 63 or 64.
Now, your first position with at Supercut Rate Drugs with the Feld brothers was what when you were 11? What did you do?
I had a warehouse that I used to go to and package records, put the 578 RPM records into a bag, put a piece of Scotch tape on the bag, and stack them up.
And how long did you perform that type of job before you went to a different type of job?
About a year.
And what was your next job?
Selling records in the record department at the drugstore.
You're 12 years old and you're selling records.
Correct.
And they're all 78s.
All 78s.
How long did you sell?
Well, I worked in 1946. I started in 47 or thereabouts. They opened the store. They opened a second all record store. Actually, no. They opened in 46. They opened a store called Super Music and Appliances in Northeast Washington. Then in 47 they opened Super Music City on F Street, and I used to work at the 7th Street store mainly, but at Christmas time and holidays I might go down to F Street and help out there.
How old, as you grew in age, when you did this succeeding work after the packaging of records, how old were you at that time?
It was all a very short period of time. There were a lot of things happening. When I was 13, a gentleman walked into the 7th Street store named Mike Stewart, who managed the Golden Gate Quartet.
The famous Golden Gate Gospel Quartet?
Correct. And he asked Irvin if he'd be interested in promoting the act in Washington. At that time, there was a place called Turner's Arena, which was a boxing arena. A guy named Joe Turner built. Gentleman who managed that arena and was Joe Turner's son-in-law, I believe, a guy named Vince McMahon.
The Vince McMahon of WWF today?
No, his father.
His father.
And we rented Turner's Arena from Vince McMahon. Well, they used to have dances every Sunday night for it was in those days they called them colored people. It was colored dances. All the big acts of the day, Louis Jordan and etc. Would play Turner's Arena, and we used to sell their tickets for them. That's how Mike Stewart found us in 1947.
Was that Louis Jordan and the Timpani Five? Is that
correct?
The same group?
Correct.
Had the Feld brothers done any concert promotion prior to meeting Mike Stewart?
No.
So this was sort of in conjunction, was it, to promote sales of the records at the music store?
Well, the reason we sold tickets was to bring in traffic off the street, and figuring that X percentage of the people who came in to buy tickets would also buy something else.
Did it prove to be true?
Yeah, and we became known in the city of Washington as if you wanted to buy a ticket to an event, you came to Super Music City was the place to go.
Did you sell, other than the African American or black event tickets? Did you sell other?
The 7th Street store was strictly it was in the colored neighborhood, and in those days there was segregation in Washington, and pretty strong segregation. The F Street store, when we opened the F Street store, we opened a box office actually for the sale of tickets to various events, not only in the city of Washington, but you could go in there at that time and buy tickets for events, for Broadway shows, for instance.
Sporting events also, or just music and dance and that type?
It was mostly music and concerts, dances, whatever.
You couldn't buy a Washington Redskin ticket or something like that?
No, no.
So you are now selling records. Are you also selling tickets then at that time?
Correct.
How old are you at this time now?
13, 14.
Did the Felds stay in a promotion situation with Mike Schmidt?
Mike Stewart.
Or Stewart, I mean, Mike Stewart.
All we did was do business with him with the Golden Gate Quartet.
That was it.
That was it.
What other?
And then we started promoting other gospel shows.
Only gospel?
Only gospel at that time.
Can you name some of those acts?
Dixie Hummingbirds, Harmonizing Four, Five Blind Boys of Alabama, Soul Stirrers, Pilgrim Travelers. And then one day, and I don't know exactly when it was probably around 1949. A young lady walked in the store by the name of Sister Rosetta Tharpe. And she asked Irvin if he'd be interested in promoting her concerts. By this time, we had expanded from just Washington. We were doing also shows in Annapolis and Baltimore, Richmond, Norfolk. And it wasn't just one act. We were actually, we'd buy 2 or 3 or 4 gospel acts and put them together on one show. And Rosetta asked Irvin to promote her concerts, which we did, and was very successful and very popular. She was the hottest gospel singer in America at the time. In 1950, we had a major concert with Rosetta Tharpe at Griffith Stadium right prior to July 4th. It was like July 3rd.
You recall who was on the bill with her?
It was Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Madame Marie Knight, Rosetta's mother, Katie Bell Newman, and she had a lady with her by the name of Prophetess Dolly Lewis.
Prophetess?
Prophetess Dolly Lewis.
This sounds like an all-female concert.
Well, we had some male acts. We filled it out with I think the Dixie Hummingbirds were on that show.
But the headliners were these women.
Yes.
Especially Sister Tharpe.
Yes.
What?
And we had probably on the show at Griffith Stadium we probably had 7 or 8 acts, and we had like 25,000 people.
You remember what the ticket prices were?
No, I don't remember exactly. I remember, if I recall right, the top price ticket was $1.50.
What does the title of sister mean in Rosetta Tharpe's case? Was she actually a...
No,
just was a...
Sister.
Just a sister.
Just a sister.
She wasn't a nun.
No, she was not a nun. Definitely not a nun.
So
she was as far away from being a nun as you could possibly be. At any rate, that night, after the show was over, and we were back in the locker rooms, and Irvin said to Rosetta, next year we got to do something bigger and better. And Rosetta used to call Irvin Daddy, and Rosetta said, "Daddy, anything you want." And Rosetta at the time was in her 30s, and Irvin said to her, "Well, Rosetta, you're not getting any younger." I think it's about time you should get married. And Rosetta said, well, if that's what you want, that's what I'll do. So they signed the contract that night that Rosetta, on the first week in January, would bring a prospective husband to Irvin, and she was to get married in July, I think it was July 3rd, 1951, at Griffith Stadium, in a live ceremony with a preacher and everything else. And in first week in January, she brought in a gentleman by the name of Russell Morrison, who had been a valet for Lucky Millender, who was an orchestra leader.
Lucky Millender and his big band.
Correct. And signed an agreement that day for them to get married, and they got married in July. The preacher was a guy named Reverend Kelsey, who we had been recording in his church. By this time, Irvin and Izzy had a record label called Super Discs. And we used to record actually record in the church of Reverend Kelsey, and also record in the church by the churches of Elder Lightfoot Solomon Mishaw, who became in his lifetime the second richest man in the city of Washington.
What faith of churches did these two men have? Baptist? Baptist.
At any rate, Reverend Kelsey married Rosetta and Russell in Griffith Stadium. We had a ring bearer who lived upstairs from the 7th Street store. Cute little kid. And we had the biggest gospel show ever. And the finale was Rosetta Tharpe and Russell Morrison in fireworks 25 feet high. And we sold program books, sold miniature Bibles the size of a postage stamp, it was actually had the scriptures in it, and had a magnifying glass tied around it. And we sold lucky keychains. Remember those little tin things with the penny in the middle? It said,
right.
Good luck from Sister Rosetta Tharpe. And I was in charge of concessions. And after that, we took them on a 10-day honeymoon tour of the South and all the biggest ballparks. Played Charlotte, Richmond, Norfolk, Birmingham, Savannah. I don't remember where else.
All outdoors in the summertime.
All outdoors in the summertime, and all with fireworks.
Did Russell accompany his wife?
Yep.
On the tour?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Now you were.
In fact, I ran into them. Urban and I ran into. They opened a gospel club in New York called the Eighth Wonder. Many years later, and Rosetta was playing there, and Urban and I went to see her, and they were still married. I think they both died since then. But, they were married for many years.
This in 1950 and 51, when you had the first and second Rosetta Tharpe outdoor concerts at Griffith Stadium. You were, if my math is correct, you were 15 and 50.
Right.
And 16 and 51.
Correct.
Were you still in the store, or were you then strictly doing concert work?
No, I was still in the store. We did all kinds of things. By then we were also doing other concerts besides gospel. We had started sometime around 49. Urban got a call from RCA Victor Records that they were bringing. They were taking Vaughn Monroe out on tour, to promote the new 45 RPM record. And would we do them a favor by presenting Vaughn Monroe in concert, and we could keep all the money, which was a good deal.
Where was that concert?
At Constitution Hall.
In Washington, D.C.
In Washington. And that started us into the field of promoting other types of music besides gospel.
You recall some of the other concerts you had in the early years?
Well, in the 50s, well, about the same time, or shortly thereafter, Norman Granz came and asked us to promote dates for Jazz the Philharmonic, which was the hottest jazz ensemble at the time. And so we promoted Jazz the Philharmonic in Washington, and ultimately promoted it in a couple other cities also, Richmond and I think Norfolk.
Came to Minneapolis, but I don't imagine you were promoted.
No,
there.
we had not spread our wings yet that far.
Any other acts that you recall besides Vaughn Monroe and Jazz at the Philharmonic?
We used to do some rhythm and blues shows and some jazz shows. We did Sarah Vaughan. In 1951 was the first show called The Biggest Show of Stars. And Tim Gale, who with his brother owned the Gale Agency in New York, and we had been friends. We had become friendly with Tim's brother Mo, and through that became friendly with Tim. And Tim and a guy named Cress Courtney in 1951 started producing an arena show called The Biggest Show of Stars. And the first one was Nat King Cole, Sarah Vaughan, Duke Ellington and his orchestra, Peg Leg Bates, Timmy Rogers, Stump and Stumpy. There was a dance group called not June Taylor Dance. I mean, it could have been June Taylor Dancers. And there were probably 3 or 4 other acts involved. And we promoted Washington, Norfolk, and Richmond, and Baltimore. And then the following year, it was a similar type show. The headliners were Nat Cole, Sarah Vaughan, and Billy May. I believe it was Billy May. It could have been Stan Kenton. It was one of the two. No, it was Stan Kenton in '52. Stan Kenton.
And his orchestra?
And his orchestra. Along with, once again, a variety of other acts. And it did huge business. And in '53, and I'm confused now about who came first. It was Peggy Lee and Pete Rugelow's orchestra. Also, we did concerts at that time. We did a whole tour. We did about 6 or 7 cities with Billy Eckstein and George Shearing about that same period of time. And in '53, we had probably what we thought was going to be the hottest show ever. In the spring of '53, we did Tony Bennett, who was very hot with Cold Cold Heart, Because of You, and Percy Faith, who had the theme from Moulin Rouge. And they were both the hottest thing in the world, and we lost our ass.
Where was this poor attendance concert?
There was a series of them. We had about 6 or
series.
7 dates. By this time, we were promoting, and we had stretched out to Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, probably 6 or 7 cities in that area, mid-Atlantic.
Did that discourage the Feld brother, or Irvin at least, or did he just keep going?
Izzy wanted to slash his wrist, but Irvin kept on going.
What was the next thing that you recall?
Well, in the fall we had a couple shows. We had a Mambo show with Tito Puente and Perez Prado and a few other Latin American acts. Didn't do any business with that show either. And we had the one with Peggy Lee